Hey everybody, welcome to the video. So I'm breaking down the Monday Night Football showdown slate between the Los Angeles Rams and the San Francisco 49ers, and what should be a pretty fun NFC West showdown. We have a 50-point over-under, 3.5-point spread, and a lot of exciting players to watch, especially with the new addition of Odell Beckham Jr. We'll be excited how the Rams deploy him in his first game since joining the team, especially with Robert Woods tearing his ACL in practice on Friday. But I'm looking forward to it. I'm sure you guys are as well. And if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. If you want to take that one step further, become an official member over on Patreon. Link is down below in the description for that. Spreadsheets, cheat sheets, optimizers, ownership projections, all that fun stuff for the NBA and the NFL. And MLB and NASCAR when those seasons start back up again. So if you want to check it out, link will be found down below. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by PrizePicks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified. Just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests, or salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the props they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're new signing over on PrizePicks, you can get a free money bonus as it is deposit match up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. I think that'll be it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the quarterback position. I'm kind of surprised on the pricing of these two, especially Matthew Stafford. You'd think he'd be above $11,000 here, but at $10,800, that actually is a very nice price point for a guy like Stafford, as good as he's been so far this year. And Jimmy Garoppolo, not a huge fan of him on this slate, but it's quarterback, so I always have to have interest in both. But I do worry about Trey Lance maybe stealing some plays on the goal line, which could obviously hurt Jimmy Garoppolo's touchdown upside. But we'll start with Stafford here. Below $11,000, I think this is a nice price point, and it's a good matchup versus the 49ers. They're currently 20-50 versus the pass and 27 versus quarterback so far this season. And Stafford, I mean, he's been one of the best quarterbacks in the league so far this year. Kind of didn't have a great game versus the Titans last week, only around 15-some DraftKings points, but should be a nice bounce back spot here. And I know losing Robert Woods is pretty awful. I mean, he's one of the go-to wide receivers, like a 21% target share and over 7 targets per game this season. They added Odell. We'll see how he fits in the offense. I'm not expecting a huge role for him in his first game because he just joined the team, so he obviously doesn't know the playbook that well, but I'm sure they have some drawn-up plays specifically for Odell, maybe a nice splash play or two, but you still have Cooper Kupp, the best wide receiver in football this season. Van Jefferson's going to have to step up and make some plays, so I definitely think he's capable of that. You still have Tyler Higbee. I think Matthew Stafford is going to be just fine here. I mean, I don't think the question is whether if you're going to play him or not, because, I mean, you're probably playing on around 60 to 70% of your lineups, so you're building 150 lineups tonight. I think the question is how much do you want to captain Matthew Stafford, and while the price point's fine, and I think he could be an optimal captain, I don't think he's the most likely optimal captain. I think one of these pass-catching options in this game, because even on the 49ers side of the ball, they have a ton of good pass-catching options like Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, who's actually stepped it up the past 2 weeks. You have George Kittle now. And there's even some running backs that I could see be optimal over Matthew Stafford. I think Stafford's an excellent flex play. I'd be very surprised if he's not in the optimal. But I think one of those pass-catching options is probably more likely to be in the optimal. So I'm probably going to play around 10 to 15% Matthew Stafford in the captain spot, maybe just a little bit more. Probably not much more than that. And Jimmy Garoppolo, $10,000. Like I said, Trey Lance could always throw a wrench in this, but I think he's fine. I'm probably not going to have much Jimmy Garoppolo captain, to be honest. The Rams have actually been kind of stingy versus quarterbacks this season. I'm not really one to care about matchups too much, but Jimmy G is not the most explosive quarterback out there. But Deebo Samuel has been amazing for him so far this season, getting George Kittle back, obviously a boost. But I'm probably not going to play more than like 5 to 10% of Jimmy Garoppolo in the captain spot. I'll probably be on the lower end of that. And then moving on over to our lineup, like I said, I probably think Matthew Stafford's best utilized in the flex spot. I will have some captain Matthew Stafford, but for this lineup, maybe going for more of a cash game build, we're just going to play against Stafford for right now. I'm going to bypass Jimmy G just because I don't think he's a must play. Like, I will have a good chunk of Jimmy G, the starting quarterback on a showdown slate, with a decent implied team total with some good pass catching options to get the ball to. But for this lineup, I'm probably just going to bypass Jimmy G unless he fits at the very end, which I think is probably highly unlikely, but I think he's a fine play. But just sticking with Matthew Stafford for now. And then moving on to the running back position, we'll start with the Rams here first, which is basically a two-man show of Darrell Henderson at $9,200 and Sony Michel at $5,000. Henderson played on 60% of the snaps last week, Sony Michel around 40%. Darrell Henderson is the lead back. He's going to get the majority of the touches. He's going to get the goal line work for the most part, but Sony Michel does have somewhat of a role in this offense. Kind of an annoying role, especially for those of us that always play Darrell Henderson. I wish he was a little bit cheaper, to be honest. Like I would rather play a $9K Deebo Samuel than I would a $9,200 Darrell Henderson if you had to pick between the two, but I mean, he's on a great offense, high implied team total, 3.5-point favorite. The 49ers, despite being 60th versus the run, are still 21st versus running backs, allowing a rushing touchdown and nearly 100 rushing yards per game. So I think Henderson's fine. I mean, he's got 10% target share in the season, close to 4 targets per game, and over 15 rushing attempts. So the volume is pretty good. You're usually looking around 15, 20 touches for Henderson every single game on what is a great offense, and he's always going to have scoring opportunity, 4.6 yards per carry so far this season. I just think the price tag is a little bit tough to get to. Not saying I won't play Henderson, but won't be as high on for me as he has been the past couple shit-on sites for me, just because that price point's a little bit tougher to get to. There's some other good options that are similarly priced that I feel like have a little bit more upside. Sony Michel, I'm probably going to not play too much Sony Michel at this price point. I mean, $5,000 is a bit steep. Yeah, 8 rushing attempts per game, but not really using the passing game. If he gets to the end zone, yeah, you'll be happy. But I think on yardage alone, Sony Michel will probably not get there at that price point. If he was like a few $1,000s cheaper, I think Sony Michel would definitely be in play. But at $5,000, I probably won't have much Sony Michel. And if he happens to score, well, whatever, I guess I'll take the L there. But I'm going to have some Sony, but probably not very much. I'll definitely be underweight on him at $5,000. Then moving on to the San Francisco 49ers. So it's basically Eli Mitchell and probably Jeff Wilson Jr. this week at $1,200. I think he's one of the better value plays in the entire slate. Eli Mitchell played around close to 70% of the snaps last weekend, only $6,400 on the Rams. Really not the best matchup out there. They're kind of just mid-pack versus running backs in terms of DVOA and fantasy points allowed per game. And Eli Mitchell has been very good this year, so I think he's definitely in play, especially at only $6,400. Like that's a pretty cheap price point for an RB1. Like I definitely think he should be used in our lineups on this slate. Like he's been good this year, 5.3 yards per carry, maybe not elite volume, but he should get the majority of the touches in this game. And Jeff Wilson, so JaMycal Hasty is out this week, and he played on close to 40% of the snaps last week. Wilson did not play, but you have to assume he's going to be the RB2 in this offense. So if he's going to play like 30-40% of the snaps and get a handful of touches, maybe a target or two, I mean, that's really good value at $1,200. I'm not saying he's a complete lock on this slate, but in terms of point per dollar, he's definitely looking like one of the better options, and I think you could get away with him in cash games just because he makes some things fit down low. I wouldn't say the value options are amazing on the slate, maybe outside of a couple of cheap Rams wide receivers. I think Jeff Wilson is certainly going to be in play. And then rest running backs on this slate, you just kind of have to close your eyes and hope for the best. Maybe Trenton Cannon gets some work with no JaMycal Hasty, but so moving back over to our lineup, like I hinted at, I think Eli Mitchell is just way too cheap on this slate. I like Henderson. I'll have some Henderson, but for right now, I'm going to take that price point on Eli Mitchell. I mean, it's $6,400. I know they didn't get a lot of carries last week versus Arizona, but 18 and 18 the weeks before that, 19, 22 points. I think he's just a little bit too cheap, and I wouldn't say the Rams have been dominant versus the run so far this season. And then we could play Jeff Wilson. I'm not sure if we're going to need him, but we'll probably try to wait till the end and see how much money we have left, but do think Wilson will be in play as well, as only $1,200. And then moving on to the wide receivers, lots of good options here to pick from, so there's no shortage of good wide receivers on this slate. Unfortunately, we're down Bobby Trees. I always love playing Bobby Trees, but we cannot play him on the slate due to the torn ACL, so it does open up some value on the Rams side of the ball here. But we'll start with the Rams group first, which consists of Cooper Kupp, $12,000. He's been the man this year. We now have the new addition of Odell Beckham Jr. at $7,400, Van Jefferson at $5,400. Then you have J.J. Koski and Ben Skowronek, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, both at $200, who could provide some value stepping in kind of that wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4 role, assuming Odell is quite limited in this game. But looking at snaps last week, it's kind of hard to put anything into this, but we know Cooper Kupp's going to play about 100% of the snaps, as did Robert Woods, and Van Jefferson played on 96% of these snaps. And I assume that Jefferson is going to step into the wide receiver 2 role for this game. I could kind of see Odell taking that over as the season progresses, but I mean, how much can we really expect Odell to play in this game? He just learned the playbook. I think at $7,400, he's probably a bit overpriced for the number of snaps he's going to be playing in this game. I still think maybe he's worth playing like 10 to 15%, but I have to wait and see. If we can get a better grasp of the workload, maybe we'll know exactly how much to play of Odell. But I mean, Cooper Kupp is probably going to be the most optimal captain on the slate. He'll be my highest owned player in general and my highest owned captain. I know he's quite expensive, but I think we can make it work on this slate. I was looking at some of the lineups the optimizer is building, and if we're comfortable just going with some punt options, I think Cooper Kupp in the captain spot can definitely be used. And if we're just looking at the numbers this season, it's really hard to argue against it. He's been one of the best. He's like having one of the best wide receiver seasons of all time right now. Over 11 targets per game, over 8 catches, over 110 receiving yards, over a touchdown per game on a 32% target share, 33.5% market share of the team's air yards. The guy has just been absolutely incredible this season. Him and Matthew Stafford just have one of the best connections I've ever seen. 20-50 versus the pass, 49ers defenses, and they're 12th versus wide receivers. But you don't really care about matchups when it comes to Cooper Kupp. We know he's going to get fed the rock, and he just crushes defenses each and every single week. So despite the high price point, I will be having a lot of Cooper Kupp. My highest projected play on the slate by about 5 to 7 points. Like, I have him around 26, 27 points projected. Matthew Stafford's coming in around 22, 23 points. So definitely liking Cooper Kupp a lot. And then the other options, we have Odell, who I said might be a bit overpriced due to probably workload restrictions in his first game, although we'll have to wait and see. But Van Jefferson at $5,400, liking him a lot. Should be the wide receiver 2 in this offense. Played on 96% of the snaps last week. Don't really see his role reducing by much with Odell coming in, and Van Jefferson maybe in the coming weeks. But Van Jefferson should play a boatload of snaps. Only $5,400, should get the rock. The guy has proven he can have success with Matthew Stafford in the past. More of a deep shot guy, but I could see him maybe being more of a possession/deep shot guy in this game. So definitely liking Van Jefferson a lot at $5,400 because Robert Woods, we're vacating a 21% target share and over 7 targets per game, and the ball's got to go somewhere. So Van Jefferson, Tyler Higbee, could definitely see getting bumps in this game, maybe even just Cooper Kupp in general as well. And then the punt options, we have Koski, and I think Skowronek at $200 might be a very good value play. I have him projected for like 3 to 5 points, which at $200, he's going to pop a lot in optimizers. And I will say, he makes things work. Like, if you want to put Cooper Kupp in the captain spot, he does open up a lot of value for you. So just keep in mind, he is certainly playable. Only played 4% of the snaps last week. But again, losing Robert Woods, there's a lot of vacated snaps for the Rams wide receiver group. And then moving on to the 49ers wide receiver group, we have Deebo Samuel at $9,000, Brandon Ayuk at $6,600. And then with no Mohamed Sanu, we have guys like Trent Sherfield and Juwan Jennings, whatever it is. They're both at $200. But I think there's actually some value here because no Mohamed Sanu, he played over 50% of the snaps last week, and that's going to open up some playing time for some of those cheapies down low. But up top, we have Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel both playing over 90% of the snaps. So I think Brandon Ayuk is officially out of the doghouse. He's actually seen a decent amount of targets the past couple of weeks. But Deebo Samuel has kind of been the guy you've wanted in this offense so far this year. Actually been one of the better wide receivers in football, boasting over a 32% target share, nearly 10 targets per game, over 6 catches, and 110 receiving yards, which is not too far off of Cooper Kupp right now. I'm not saying Deebo Samuel is Cooper Kupp, but Samuel's been very, very strong this season. I won't say this matchup is very good versus the Rams, 50 versus the pass, but they are 17th versus wide receiver. These guys quite a bit. Deebo Samuel, I'm going to try to jam in a lot of my lineups tonight, assuming the 49ers are probably playing from behind. I know it's not a massive spread or anything, but I do think they'll have to use some Deebo Samuel in this game. Brandon Ayuk has actually been usable the past 2 weeks. I know he's only got a 12% target share in the season and 3.75 targets per game, but if you just look at the past couple of weeks, which I think are probably more important, he's definitely had a very strong role in this offense and playing a lot of snaps. And then Sherfield and Jennings, both not really used too often, but with no Mohamed Sanu, who played over 50% of the snaps last week, these guys will definitely get bumped up because they only played less than 10% both. So I will definitely see that playing time get bumped up, which at $200, again, if you want to jam in some expensive guys in the captain spot, know those expensive skill position players, we have to find some value. One of these guys aren't pretty. They should be on the field, which is good enough for me. Moving over to our lineup, we got to find a captain. And I think Cooper Kupp, despite being super expensive, we're talking $18,000 in the captain spot. I think he's going to be the way to go for this lineup. Now, if we have to take him out because we don't have the salary to make it work, we can do that. But for right now, let's just try to plug in Cooper Kupp. That's going to leave us around $5,000 left for our last couple of spots. I did mention I really like Van Jefferson in this slate just because with Robert Woods being out, he's going to see an expanded role in this offense. Like, he was already quite usable in this offense, had 7 targets the past 3 weeks, and that is with Robert Woods playing. So if you take him out of the equation, yes, they added Odell, but Van Jefferson should see the second most targets at the wide receiver position on this slate, and he's not that expensive either. $8,100 in the captain spot, but $5,400 in the flex spot just seems a bit underpriced in my opinion. So we're going to plug him in, and that doesn't take us too far off of our average salary remaining because we still have around $4,700 left, which we can definitely put together a pretty solid lineup. I'm not going to use anybody else for right now, but we could definitely put together something pretty nice here with around $5,000 left, whether we go with expensive and a punt or 2 mid-range players. And moving on to the tight end position, it's pretty easy here because we really only have 2 usable options because everybody else just does not play many snaps whatsoever or is really used in the passing game, like Tyler Higbee. 97% of the snaps last week at the tight end position, and we had Blanton that saw 3% of the snaps. So it's basically just Tyler Higbee for the Rams, so it's kind of easy to break down. And with no Robert Woods, should definitely see a bit of a bump, maybe a target or 2 extra, but he's definitely usable. But at $6,200, I will say he is a little bit pricey there because he's not that great, but he's definitely used in the offense. If he gets into the end zone, he'll probably be happy. If he does not score $6,200, I have a hard time seeing him be optimal, but touchdowns are always possible for him. Then George Kittle returned from the IR last week. Didn't really miss a beat. Close to 75% of the snaps. 8 targets, 6 catches, 100 yards. Got to the end zone. Did lose a fumble, but a great day all around. Nearly 25 DraftKings points. And just one of the most explosive tight ends in all of football. So I would definitely have some exposure to him. And then the backups, Ross Dwelley and Charlie Warner. They just don't really play that many snaps now. Like we saw Dwelley and both those guys below 15% of the snaps last weekend. So really, for me, unless you're just punting with 1% of these guys, just to maybe hope they get a catch, it's really pretty much just George Kittle and Tyler Higbee for me. And as far as defenses go, as you guys know, I typically just usually underweight the defenses or just kind of right matched on the field. I don't really see myself playing too much of the defenses here. If I had to play one, I would say the Rams just because they're the favorites here. But this is a 50-point over-under with a 3.5-point spread. So I think both defenses are probably not going to score that well. They don't really project that well. Unless there's a defensive touchdown or just a whole bunch of sacks and turnovers, I don't really see any of these defenses being optimal. I would not captain one of these defenses, and I'll probably have a max of like 10 to 15% on the Rams and probably like a max of 5% for the 49ers. So if they happen to be optimal, just know I'm probably not having a very good night. And then for the kickers, as I always say, they're fine cash game plays, but their ceilings are pretty low for the most part unless they just kick a ton of field goals. So with both these teams, I could see, especially the Rams, scoring a lot of touchdowns, so it could be a lot of extra points for a guy like Matt Gay, and they're around $4,000. Like I like when the kickers are in the low 3K range because they make them quite more playable, but these guys both have them projected for around 8 fantasy points. That's fine. Like, they're floors. They're going to score points. Like, there's just no way these guys are going to get 0 unless the team gets shut out. So they have somewhat decent floor for cash games, but in tournaments, I am typically either even to the field or slightly underweight, and I never captain kickers. It just doesn't really work out most nights. And as far as the rest of this lineup goes, we could either go super expensive on punt, or we could try to go more so mid-range. I do want a pass-catching option for the 49ers, and we could go all the way up top to a guy like Deebo Samuel and see if that happens to fit. Now, we're probably using one of these dirt cheap options, but let's see here. So if we plug in Deebo, that's going to leave us $400 left. But like I said, there are some punt options that I think are fine in the slate. You have Skronek, who is questionable, but I am assuming he plays. But if not, obviously we got to find some extra value. But I think he would be in play. Sherfield with no Mohamed Sanu, I think I wouldn't say he's a good play, but at least he'll be on the field and maybe catches a ball or two. And if he does it, $200. That is not terrible. If you wanted to go with George Kittle, save about $1,200 because he's only $7,800. That leaves us $1,600 left, which would get you a Jeff Wilson, which probably feels a little bit better, to be honest. Like, that's not a terrible looking lineup. I'm not saying I'm going to 100% use this lineup, but I could see that working out in a couple of formats. So I'll let you guys use your imagination there, but I definitely think there's a lot of ways we can go to make some pretty interesting lineups on this slate. But with that being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video. So I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Check out the Patreon if you think you'll be interested in some extra content, ownership projections, optimizers, all that fun stuff. It's what I use to put 150 lineups each and every single showdown slate. So if you want to check it out, link can be found down below. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by PrizePicks. So you versus the projections, and as of right now, if you're a new signing over there, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you. But I think it'll be it. I'll stop rambling. I'll get out of here. And I wish you guys the best of luck on the showdown slate tonight.